The avoidant did not end the relationship impulsively or without pattern. What felt sudden and unexpected to you was actually the culmination of a calculated process the avoidant had been executing over an extended period. What appeared to be random withdrawal or inexplicable coldness was methodical dismantling of the relationship through specific steps designed to make leaving easier for them. What seemed like confusion or mixed signals was deliberate withholding of information that would have helped you understand what was happening. The avoidant discarded you through 9 distinct calculated steps that unfold in predictable sequence. Each step serves a specific purpose in the avoidant's defensive strategy. Each creates particular outcome that moves them closer to ending the relationship while protecting them from accountability, vulnerability, and guilt. Understanding these steps reveals that the avoidance behavior was not random or about you failing, but was predetermined pattern they execute in every relationship that becomes too real. The avoidant also deliberately kept crucial information from you throughout this process. They withheld their true feelings, their actual intentions, their real reasons for withdrawing. This withholding was strategic. It prevented you from having the information you needed to protect yourself or make informed decisions about the relationship. It kept you confused and hopeful while the avoidant systematically dismantled the connection. Understanding what they deliberately kept from you reveals the manipulation inherent in their pattern, even when that manipulation is unconscious. Step 1. The avoidant began emotionally distancing while maintaining surface connection. The first calculated step in the avoidance discard process was beginning to emotionally distance themselves from you while maintaining enough surface connection that you would not recognize what was happening. This emotional distancing started long before any obvious signs of trouble appeared. The avoidant began pulling back internally, creating emotional walls, detaching from feelings for you, all while continuing to show up physically and go through the motions of the relationship. This step served crucial function for the avoidant. It allowed them to begin the process of leaving emotionally before leaving physically. It gave them time to detach and desensitize themselves to the loss of the relationship. It created internal distance that would make the eventual breakup easier to execute. All of this happened while you remained fully invested and unaware that detachment process had begun. The avoidant deliberately kept from you that this emotional distancing was happening. They continued to participate in the relationship as though everything was normal. They showed up for dates, responded to messages, maintained routines, but internally they were already creating separation. This deliberate withholding of their actual emotional state prevented you from knowing the relationship was in danger until the avoidant was already emotionally prepared to leave. This first step is particularly calculated because it protects the avoidant while leaving you vulnerable. The avoidant gets time to emotionally detach and prepare for the end, while you remain attached and unprepared. When the avoidant eventually executes later steps of the discard, they are emotionally ready while you are blindsided. This imbalance is not accidental but strategic element of their pattern. Step 2. The avoidant started devaluing you while overvaluing your flaws. The second calculated step was the avoidant beginning to devalue you as person and partner, while simultaneously overvaluing your flaws and shortcomings. The avoidant started to focus obsessively on things about you they did not like, did not agree with, found irritating or problematic. They magnified small issues into major incompatibilities. They reframed normal human imperfections as fatal flaws that made the relationship impossible. This devaluation served specific purpose in the avoidance discard process. It created internal justification for leaving. The avoidant needed to convince themselves you were not right for them, that the relationship was fundamentally flawed, that ending things was reasonable decision rather than fear-driven pattern. Devaluing you made leaving feel like a logical choice rather than defensive flight. The avoidant deliberately kept from you that this devaluation was happening. They did not communicate that they were seeing you differently, or that their perception of you had shifted. They did not tell you they were focusing on your flaws and building case against the relationship in their mind. This withholding prevented you from addressing their concerns or understanding that the relationship was being undermined. When the avoidant did eventually express criticisms or complaints, they presented them as new observations rather than as part of ongoing devaluation process. This made you believe the issues were arising in the moment when actually the avoidant had been cataloging and amplifying them internally for extended period. This deliberate misrepresentation kept you confused about what was really happening and why. Step 3. The avoidant created physical and emotional distance through withdrawal. The third calculated step was the avoidant creating physical and emotional distance through systematic withdrawal from connection and intimacy. The avoidant became less available for spending time together. They reduced communication frequency and depth. They pulled back from physical affection and emotional vulnerability. They created space between you that grew wider over time. This withdrawal served function of further detaching while also testing your response. The avoidant used the distance to continue desensitizing themselves to losing you. They also observed how you responded to their withdrawal to determine how difficult the eventual discard would be. If you pursued desperately, they knew you would fight the breakup. If you gave them space, they knew leaving might be easier. The avoidant deliberately kept from you the real reason for their withdrawal. They might offer superficial explanations about being busy or stressed or needing space for personal reasons. They did not tell you the withdrawal was actually about their fear of the relationship becoming too real or their preparation for ending things. This withholding of true motivation kept you attributing the distance to temporary circumstances rather than recognizing it as part of discard process. The avoidance withdrawal was also calculated in its gradualness. They did not pull away suddenly but incrementally, allowing you to adjust to each new level of distance before creating more. This gradual withdrawal normalized the distance and made it harder for you to identify when the relationship had fundamentally changed. The slow, systematic nature of this step was strategic rather than accidental. Step 4. The avoidant began rewriting the relationship history to justify leaving. The fourth calculated step was the avoidant beginning to rewrite the history of the relationship in their mind to create narrative that justified leaving. The avoidant started to minimize the good times and magnify the problems. They forgot or dismissed the moments of genuine connection and focused obsessively on conflicts and incompatibilities. They revised their understanding of the relationship to see it as fundamentally flawed from the beginning. This rewriting of history served purpose of reducing guilt and confirming their decision to leave. The avoidant needed to believe the relationship was never really right, that problems were insurmountable, that ending things was inevitable. This revisionist history allowed them to leave while maintaining narrative that they were making reasonable decision rather than running from intimacy. The avoidant deliberately kept from you that they were rewriting history. They did not tell you they were reinterpreting everything that had happened between you through new negative lens. They did not share that they were creating completely different story about the relationship than the one you both had been living. This withholding meant you continued operating from shared history while the avoidant was already operating from revised version that justified their exit. When the avoidant eventually expressed this revised history during the breakup, it felt shocking and unfair because you had no idea they had been slowly changing the narrative. The history they presented as truth was actually recent construction, but the avoidant presented it as though it had always been their perspective. This deliberate misrepresentation was a strategic element that protected them from accountability. Step 5. The avoidant started mentally planning their exit strategy. The fifth calculated step was the avoidant beginning to mentally plan their exit from the relationship. The avoidant thought through how they would end things, when they would do it, what they would say. They considered logistics like living situations, shared responsibilities, mutual friends. They prepared themselves mentally for the conversation and the aftermath. All of this planning happened while you remained completely unaware that ending was being actively considered. This mental planning served purpose of making the actual breakup easier to execute when the time came. The avoidant removed uncertainty and prepared responses to questions you might ask. they thought through objections you might raise and how they would counter them. They essentially scripted the breakup conversation in advance so they would not be caught off guard or swayed by your emotions when they delivered it. The avoidant deliberately kept from you that they were planning to end the relationship. They gave no indication they were thinking about leaving while they were actively preparing to do exactly that. This withholding was particularly cruel because it prevented you from preparing yourself emotionally or making your own informed decisions about whether to stay in relationship. That was about to end. The avoidance mental exit planning often included backup plans. They considered what they would do if you reacted badly, if mutual friends took sides, if ending things was harder than anticipated. They prepared for multiple scenarios, all while you operated with no knowledge that ending was being actively planned. This calculated preparation gave the avoidant every advantage when they eventually executed the discard. Step 6. The avoidant created conditions that made you question yourself and the relationship. The 6th calculated step was the avoidant deliberately creating conditions that made you question yourself, your perceptions, and the viability of the relationship. The avoidant became inconsistent in their behavior, alternating between moments of connection and periods of coldness. They gave mixed signals that left you confused about where you stood. They created uncertainty that made you doubt your own judgment about what was happening. This creation of doubt and confusion served specific purpose in the discard process. It made you less likely to confront the avoidant directly about their changing behavior. It made you blame yourself for problems in the relationship rather than recognizing the avoidance patterns. It destabilized you emotionally, so you would be less equipped to handle the eventual breakup. It allowed the avoidant to maintain control while preparing to leave. The avoidant deliberately kept from you that this confusion was being created intentionally. They did not tell you they were giving mixed signals on purpose to keep you off balance. They did not admit they were behaving inconsistently as strategy rather than as genuine confusion about their feelings. This withholding allowed the gaslighting effect to work without you recognizing you were being manipulated. The avoidance creation of doubt often included making you question whether you were too needy, too demanding, too sensitive. They subtly suggested that problems in the relationship were your fault for wanting too much or reading too much into their behavior. This blame shifting was a calculated move that protected the avoidant from accountability while making you absorb responsibility for the relationship deteriorating. Step 7. The avoidant lined up their next option or reinforced their independence. The 7th calculated step was the avoidant either lining up their next romantic option or reinforcing their independent life to the point where you became peripheral rather, then central. Some avoidants began emotionally or physically investing in someone new while still with you. Others focused intensely on work, hobbies, friends, anything that demonstrated they had full life without you. Both approaches served same purpose of ensuring they would not be alone or at loose ends when they ended the relationship. This step served function of removing the avoidant's last hesitation about leaving. If they had somewhere or someone to go to, or if they had proven to themselves they could be happy without you, they had eliminated the main barrier to executing the discard. This step ensured the avoidant would not change their mind out of loneliness or fear of being alone after ending the relationship. The avoidant deliberately kept from you that they were creating these backup plans or escape routes. They did not tell you they were emotionally investing elsewhere or deliberately building life that excluded you. They maintained appearance of being in committed relationship while actually preparing for exit and ensuring they would be fine when you were gone. If the avoidant was lining up new romantic option, they were particularly careful to hide this. They may have framed new person as just friend or colleague. They may have met them in ways that seemed innocent, but internally they were investing emotionally in this person as future partner while still technically committed to you. This calculated overlap was designed to ensure smooth transition from one relationship to the next. Step 8. The avoidant picked the optimal moment to execute the discard. The 8th calculated step was the avoidant choosing the optimal moment to execute the actual discard. They did not end the relationship randomly, but waited for specific conditions that made leaving easiest for them. They might wait until after major holiday or event so they did not have to deal with it during important time. They might wait until they had secured new living situation or job. They might wait until they felt you were most stable and least likely to react badly. This timing calculation served purpose of minimizing difficulty and maximizing clean break. The avoidant wanted to leave under conditions that gave them best chance of easy exit without prolonged drama or difficulty. They considered their own comfort and convenience in timing without regard for what timing might be best or least harmful for you. The avoidant deliberately kept from you that they were calculating optimal exit timing. They did not tell you they were waiting for right moment to end things while going through motions of relationship. They allowed you to plan future, make commitments, invest emotionally, all while knowing they were just waiting for their chosen moment to execute the discard they had been. Planning. The avoidant's chosen timing often felt particularly cruel because it came right after a period of apparent stability or even closeness. This was strategic. The avoidant often waited until things seemed good to you, so the breakup would be more surprising, and you would be less prepared to fight it or see it coming. The shock and confusion this created gave the avoidant advantage in executing clean break. Step 9. The avoidant executed the discard and controlled the narrative. The ninth and final calculated step was the avoidant executing the actual discard while controlling the narrative about why it was happening and what the relationship had been. The avoidant delivered the breakup with explanation that served their needs rather than reflecting complete truth. They presented version of events that minimized their patterns and protected their image. They controlled the story that would be told to mutual friends and in their own mind about why the relationship ended. This narrative control served purpose of protecting the avoidant from accountability and guilt. By framing the breakup as being about incompatibility, timing, or mutual issues, rather than about their fear and patterns, the avoidant avoided facing their role in destroying the relationship. By controlling what story was told, they influenced how others perceived the situation and reduced social consequences of their discard. The avoidant deliberately kept from you the real reasons for the discard even as they were executing it. They did not tell you about the 9 calculated steps they had taken. They did not admit they had been emotionally distant, devaluing you, planning their exit, lining up other options. They did not acknowledge their patterns or take responsibility for their fear-driven behavior. This final withholding meant you were discarded without ever being given the truth about what really happened. The avoidance narrative often included elements designed to make you accept the breakup and not fight it. They might say they care about you, but the relationship is not right. They might claim they need to work on themselves. They might insist this is best for both of you. All of these framings were calculated to reduce your resistance while protecting the avoidant from having to face that they destroyed relationship out of fear rather than legitimate incompatibility. What the avoidant deliberately kept from you throughout this process, throughout all 9 steps of the calculated discard, the avoidant deliberately withheld crucial information that would have helped you understand what was happening and protect yourself. They kept from you that they were emotionally detaching while maintaining surface connection. They did not tell you they were devaluing you and building case against the relationship. They hid that they were planning their exit while acting as though the relationship had future. The avoidant kept from you their true feelings, their actual intentions, their real reasons for behavior changes. They allowed you to attribute their distance to stress or busyness when it was actually fear and preparation to leave. They let you believe problems were temporary when they had already decided the relationship was over. They permitted you to plan future while knowing they would not be in that future. Most devastatingly, the avoidant kept from you that their patterns were the real reason for the discard. They let you believe it was about incompatibility or your flaws when it was actually about their inability to tolerate intimacy. They allowed you to take on guilt and self-blame when the true issue was their fear-driven attachment patterns. This withholding of the real reason meant you absorbed damage to your self-esteem that was never warranted. The avoidant also kept from you that this entire process was predictable pattern they execute in every relationship, not unique situation created by specific dynamic with you. They allowed you to believe your relationship was special case when actually it was typical example of their pattern playing out. This withholding prevented you from recognizing you were not the problem and that anyone would have experienced the same discard. Why understanding the calculated nature of the discard matters for your healing. Understanding that the avoidant discarded you through 9 calculated steps rather than through spontaneous decision or genuine incompatibility is crucial for your healing. It reveals that what happened was not about you failing or being inadequate, but about the avoidant executing predetermined pattern. It shows that no matter what you had done differently, the outcome would have been the same because the discard process was about their patterns rather than your behavior. This understanding removes the self-blame that often follows being discarded by an avoidant. You can recognize that the emotional distancing, the devaluation, the withdrawal, the rewriting of history, the exit planning, the confusion creation, the backup options, the timing calculation, and the narrative control were all strategic elements of pattern that had nothing to do with your worth or lovability. Understanding the calculated nature also helps you see the manipulation that was present, even if unconscious. The avoidance, withholding of information, their deliberate creation of confusion, their strategic timing, their narrative control were all manipulative elements that kept you at disadvantage throughout the process. Recognizing this manipulation helps you stop minimizing what was done to you and validates the pain and confusion you experienced. This understanding also prepares you to recognize these patterns early if you encounter another avoidant in the future. You will know what emotional distancing while maintaining surface connection looks like. You will recognize devaluation and withdrawal as warning signs. You will see through narrative control and demand truth about what is really happening. This knowledge protects you from being discarded in the same calculated way again. Finally, understanding the calculated nature of the discard helps you recognize that the avoidance behavior toward you says everything about them and their patterns and nothing about you and your value. The 9 steps they executed were about their fear and their limitations. What they kept from you was evidence of their inability to be honest and vulnerable. None of it reflected your worth or the real potential of the relationship if the avoidant had been capable of showing up authentically. The calculated discard process reveals the avoidant's profound limitations as partner rather than revealing any inadequacy in you. Healthy partners do not emotionally distance while maintaining surface connection. They do not devalue people they care about. They do not plan exits while pretending commitment. They do not create confusion and control narratives. The fact that the avoidant does all of these things is statement about their capacity, not about your lovability. Understanding this truth fully allows you to move forward, knowing that being discarded by someone with severe attachment issues through calculated pattern says nothing about whether you deserve love or can have healthy relationship. It says only that you were in relationship with someone whose patterns made them incapable of maintaining intimacy and who chose to protect themselves through strategic discard. Rather than doing the work to change their patterns or be honest about their limitations. How each step of the calculated discard served the avoidant's self-protection. Each of the 9 calculated steps the avoidant executed served specific function in protecting them from the vulnerability, guilt, and accountability that honest ending would have required. The emotional distancing protected them from the pain of losing you by beginning the detachment process early while you remained attached. This imbalance meant they suffered less when the actual breakup happened because they had been grieving and separating for extended period. The devaluation protected the avoidant from guilt about ending the relationship. By convincing themselves you were not right for them and the relationship was fundamentally flawed, they avoided facing that they were destroying something good out of fear. The devaluation created justification that allowed them to leave without taking responsibility for their patterns being the real reason. The withdrawal protected the avoidant from increasing intimacy while buying them time to prepare their exit. Creating distance prevented the relationship from deepening further and triggering more of their fear. It also gave them space to emotionally detach and make plans without the pressure of your full presence and investment. The withdrawal was defensive maneuver that served multiple protective purposes. The rewriting of history protected the avoidant from acknowledging what they were actually losing. By minimizing the good and magnifying the bad, they convinced themselves the relationship was not valuable and leaving was not significant loss. This revisionist history allowed them to avoid facing the grief of losing someone who mattered and connection that was meaningful. The exit planning protected the avoidant from uncertainty and loss of control. By preparing in advance exactly how they would end things, they maintained a sense of control over the situation and reduced the unknown variables that might make the discard more difficult. The planning gave them confidence they could execute the ending cleanly without being swayed by emotion. The creation of confusion protected the avoidant from direct confrontation about their changing behavior. By keeping you uncertain and self-blaming, they avoided having to explain themselves or be held accountable for their withdrawal and devaluation. The confusion kept you focused inward on what you might be doing wrong, rather than outward on what they were clearly doing. The lining up of backup options protected the avoidant from being alone after the discard, whether through new romantic interest or reinforced independent life. They ensured they would not face the emptiness that might make them question their decision to leave. This protection from post-breakup loneliness removed one of the main barriers to executing the discard. The timing calculation protected the avoidant from maximum difficulty and drama. By choosing optimal moment, they engineered the cleanest possible break with the least resistance and complications. This protection of their own comfort in the ending showed the fundamentally self-serving nature of the entire discard process. The narrative control protected the avoidant from social and internal consequences of their actions. By framing the ending in ways that minimized their patterns and protected their image, they avoided judgment from friends and from themselves. This final protection ensured they could leave without facing full truth of what they did or why they did it. Understanding that every step served the avoidant's self-protection helps you see that the entire discard process was designed around their needs with no consideration for yours. You were not partner being respected through honest communication, but obstacle being strategically removed through calculated process. This recognition is painful, but also clarifying about the level of emotional immaturity and selfishness the avoidant operated from. The pattern repeats with every partner until the avoidant does deep work. The 9 calculated steps the avoidant executed with you are the same 9 steps they execute in every relationship that becomes real enough to threaten their defended system. The pattern is not unique to your relationship, but is standard operating procedure for how avoidants manage the fear that genuine intimacy and attachment creates. Understanding this helps you recognize you were not special failure, but typical victim of predictable pattern. The avoidant emotionally distances from every partner once real attachment begins to form. They devalue every person they are with once the relationship feels too important. They withdraw from every connection that requires actual vulnerability. They rewrite the history of every relationship to justify their exit. They plan their departure from everyone who gets close enough to threaten them. This repetition of the pattern means the avoidant will do the same thing to their next partner and the one after that, unless they do serious therapeutic work to address their attachment wounds. The rebound, who may appear to be getting better treatment, is simply at earlier stage of the same 9-step process. They will eventually experience the emotional distancing, the devaluation, the withdrawal, all of it, just as you did. Understanding this repetitive nature of the pattern is important for 2 reasons. First, it confirms that you were not the cause of the discard. The avoidant would have discarded anyone who triggered their fear of intimacy the way you did by becoming genuinely important to them. Second, it frees you from the fantasy that the avoidant might be different with someone else. They will not be different until they heal, and healing requires work they likely are not doing. The pattern also repeats because the avoidant never faces the real consequences of their behavior. You may be hurt and confused, but the avoidant moves on to the next relationship before having to sit with what their patterns cost them. They execute their calculated discard, control the narrative to avoid accountability, and start fresh with someone new before the full weight of losing you can register. This avoidance of consequences means the avoidant has no motivation to change. The pattern works for them in the sense that it allows them to avoid the vulnerability of real intimacy while still having relationships that meet their surface needs. Until the pattern stops working because they cannot find anyone willing to tolerate it, or because they face undeniable loss they cannot run from, they will continue executing it. Some avoidants do eventually face consequences that force them to confront their patterns. They may lose someone so important that the loss cannot be minimized or avoided. They may reach age or life stage where being alone is no longer sustainable. They may have enough people walk away that they cannot maintain their narrative about being the healthy one. When and if this happens, some avoidants do the deep work to change. But this is far from guaranteed and typically happens long after they have discarded you. What you could not have done differently to prevent the calculated discard. One of the most painful questions after being discarded by an avoidant is what you could have done differently to prevent it. Understanding the calculated nature of the discard process reveals the answer: nothing. The avoidance 9-step process was predetermined response to intimacy becoming real. And no behavior on your part could have prevented it from unfolding. You could not have prevented the emotional distancing by being less needy because your neediness was not the cause. The avoidant began distancing when attachment formed, regardless of how you behaved. You could not have prevented the devaluation by being more perfect because your flaws were not the real reason. The avoidant would have found something to devalue about anyone because devaluation served function of justifying exit. You could not have prevented the withdrawal by giving more space because the withdrawal was not really about needing space. It was about fear of intimacy and preparation to leave. You could not have prevented the rewriting of history by making better memories because the history was being rewritten to serve narrative need, not because it accurately reflected reality. You could not have prevented the exit planning by being better partner because the planning was not response to your inadequacy. It was response to the avoidance fear becoming unmanageable. You could not have prevented the confusion creation because the confusion was strategic rather than result of anything you did or did not do. You could not have prevented the lining up of backup options by meeting all the avoidance needs, because the backup options were about the avoidant preparing for departure they had already decided on. You could not have prevented the timing calculation by being more stable, because the timing was calculated around the avoidant's comfort, not your readiness. You could not have prevented the narrative control by being more understanding, because the narrative was designed to protect the avoidant from accountability, regardless of how compassionate you were. The entire 9-step process was going to unfold regardless of your behavior, because it was about the avoidance patterns rather than about your actions or inadequacies. Understanding this complete lack of control you had over the outcome is simultaneously painful and liberating. It is painful because it confirms you were powerless to save the relationship no matter what you did. But it is liberating because it removes all the self-blame and questions about what you could have done differently. You could not have done anything differently that would have mattered because the discard was predetermined by the avoidance patterns. This truth also reveals that the avoidance withholding of information was particularly cruel because it kept you trying to fix problems that could not be fixed. While you were working on yourself and the relationship, the avoidant was executing their calculated exit. While you were hoping and investing, they were detaching and preparing to leave. The information they kept from you would have allowed you to protect yourself and stop investing in relationship that was already over in their mind. How to recognize the calculated discard early in future relationships. Understanding the 9 calculated steps allows you to recognize them early if you encounter another avoidant in the future. Recognizing the pattern early gives you power to protect yourself and make informed decisions about whether to continue investing in relationship with someone who is beginning. The discard process. The first sign is emotional distancing while surface connection is maintained. If partner seems to be pulling back emotionally while still going through motions of the relationship, this is warning sign. Pay attention to the gap between their words and their emotional presence. If they are saying right things but feeling absent, trust the feeling over the words. The second sign is sudden or increasing focus on your flaws without corresponding acknowledgement of your strengths. If partner begins cataloging your shortcomings, criticizing in ways they did not before, or seeming unable to remember why they chose you, recognize this as devaluation process. Beginning. This is not helpful feedback, but strategic demolition of your value in their mind. The third sign is withdrawal from intimacy and connection without adequate explanation. If partner becomes less available, less communicative, less affectionate without clear reason that makes sense, do not accept vague explanations about being busy or stressed. Demand clarity about what is really happening and why they are pulling away. The fourth sign is revisionist history, where partner begins to remember relationship differently than you both experienced it. If they start to characterize past events negatively when you both remembered them positively at the time, recognize this as a rewriting of history to justify exit. do not let them gaslight you about what actually happened. The fifth sign is your partner becoming secretive about future plans or being evasive about commitment to future together. If they stop including you in plans, avoid discussions about future, or seem uncertain about commitment they previously expressed, recognize this as mental exit planning beginning. Demand clarity about their intentions rather than accepting vague reassurance. The sixth sign is feeling increasingly confused, uncertain, or self-blaming in the relationship. If you find yourself constantly questioning your perceptions, wondering if you are too sensitive, or feeling like you must be doing something wrong, recognize this as the confusion creation step. Your confusion is likely being deliberately created through mixed signals and inconsistency. The seventh sign is your partner investing heavily in alternative sources of validation or building life that excludes you. If they are suddenly very focused on work, new friends, hobbies that do not include you, or if there is questionable new person in their life, recognize they may be lining up. Backup options or reinforcing independence in preparation to leave. If you recognize these signs, you have choice. The avoidance calculated withholding was designed to prevent you from having. You can confront them directly and demand honesty about what is happening. You can end the relationship yourself before being discarded. You can at minimum protect yourself emotionally by recognizing relationship is in danger and reducing your investment. The early recognition gives you power that understanding the pattern provides. The healing that comes from understanding the calculated nature of your discard. Understanding that you were discarded through 9 calculated steps rather than through organic relationship ending creates specific pathway to healing. This understanding addresses the confusion, self-blame, and loss of trust that being discarded by an avoidant typically creates. It provides framework that explains what happened and why in ways that support recovery. The healing begins with releasing self-blame. When you understand the discard was calculated pattern rather than response to your inadequacy, you stop torturing yourself about what you could have done differently. You recognize you were dealing with predetermined process rather than relationship that could have been saved through different choices on your part. The healing continues with validating your perception. The avoidance creation of confusion made you doubt your own judgment about what was happening. Understanding the calculated nature confirms your perceptions were accurate, and the confusion was deliberately created rather than result of your misunderstanding. This validation helps you trust yourself again. The healing deepens with recognizing the manipulation. Understanding that information was deliberately withheld, that confusion was strategically created, that timing was calculated, helps you name what was done to you as manipulation Even if unconscious, this recognition prevents you from minimizing the harm and validates the betrayal you experienced. The healing progresses with accepting that some people are not capable of healthy relationship.